So good morning, everybody. Thank you and welcome to this webinar. This is the Rehoboth Dream Solid Foundation, and we are welcoming you to today's webinar, which will be talking about the Nigerian youths and their rights, dealing with police profiling and the ills of the criminal justice system. Today is the 6th of July, 2024, and on behalf of the chairman, Sir Oladende Olusoga Joseph, Rear Admiral retired, and other distinguished trustees of the foundation, of the Rehoboth Dream Solid Foundation, I want to welcome you all to this webinar. RDSF has previously hosted several workshops and webinars. Some of these trainings are accompanied by follow-on classes sponsored by the foundation to enhance the skills of our beneficiaries. But this section is going to be a one-off session because we just want to pass certain information that we feel it will meet the needs of our targeted community. And today's edition is the 11th, and you can watch previous ones on our YouTube channel. So we're going to make this as quick as possible, and today's program is going to be the introduction, which is what I'm doing at the moment. And the speaker will have the floor for about 60 minutes. We launch the pool, and then we have the comments and question session. That will be anchored by Martha and I. Okay, then our guest speaker today is Olaoluwa Oni. She's a lawyer, and she has a law degree from both Nigeria and the United States. And she has practiced as a litigator in both countries. So she has 60 minutes to, deal with this topic. And I'm going to leave the platform for her now. I'm sure she intends to make this as interactive as possible, hear your experience, and also what we are going to do is that I'll be following up on the chat box. So when you indicate, or she tells me, okay, let me just make you a co-host, Olaoluwa, right? So that you can unmute from there as well, and then you can pick anybody you want to pick. So I think that will work. Okay. All right, I've made you a host. So the platform is yours. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to speak on this topic. We really appreciate, and thank you once again.
Yes, no, thank you very much, Edison, and thank you everyone for coming together today. Good morning, I should say. It's morning over there. It's morning where I am as well. It's 5 a.m. But I'm very thankful for the opportunity to speak with, Nigerians, kin, family. It's always a delightful opportunity when we get a chance to speak to each other, especially around topics of nation building, the citizens' experience of the state. I usually think about these conversations as particularly relevant because since we're all kin, since we're all in the same boat, we can imagine that we come to the conversation not just to complain, but to have a generative experience and to figure out how to navigate our way around it. And so we can assume and maybe even trust that we have the best intentions when we are in this conversation. I had a conversation with the team yesterday with Edison, and I was really impressed and warmed to learn about the work that the foundation is doing. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to be a small part of it, even in this way. So Edison is right that at the tech check I had shared that what I usually like to do when I have this sort of discussions is have a very interactive, engaged conversation. So draw from the team, share with the draw from the audience, share with the audience, have the audience inform how this conversation moves. But after we had the tech check yesterday, I was like, this might be a little too clunky, just given the fact that we're in a webinar format. So I have tinkered with it just a little bit. I don't plan for this part of the conversation, at least, to have as robust audience interaction, just so that we can have it run as smoothly as possible. And then, as I understand it, towards the end of it, we have a lot of time for Q&A, for people to just share their experiences and figure out how we can all help each other navigate, what's going on or what might possibly go on in the future. So I think that's the less clunky way to handle this. So on that note, let's get started. Oh, I should share my screen. Yes, one second.
Okay, we can see your screen.
Okay, I just need to move this now. Give me a second to move this real quick. Okay, so let me see. Is it moving? Yeah, okay. So the Nigerian youths and their rights, dealing with police profiling and the ills of the criminal justice system. So initially, I was going to start by asking us to share our experience of, the Nigerian police, just so that everybody is on the same page when we're talking about the Nigerian police. But I mean, I'm letting go of that part of the discussion again, just so that things are not as clunky, but also I haven't had the conversation with Edison yesterday. I understand that, for a lot of us on this call, what we're hoping to get from this conversation is a sense of how to deal with the Nigerian police when they're not particularly behaving optimally, or when they're, working outside the scope of their regular duties, when they're doing police violence, police profiling. And I mean, to be sure, there are instances where the Nigerian police, can be very helpful. So we're not condemning them. We're not saying Nigerian police bad. But for the purposes of this call, what we're more so interested in is how to deal with members of the Nigerian police force when they are not doing what they're supposed to be doing constitutionally and statutorily. And so in that regard, these were the questions I was going to ask to set the scene. If any one of us has had any significant experience with the Nigerian police force, so just by show of hands, to know if the experience was positive or negative, and if when we see the word, significant experience with the Nigerian police force, we assume that means negative, because that assumption will signal then that the Nigerian police force has an overwhelmingly sort of negative PR PR profile. So when people see the Nigerian police, the assumption is not that, oh, safety. The assumption is not help. The assumption is, oh, I need to be on guard. Oh, I need to be scared. Oh, I need to be afraid. Oh, I need to worry. And it's that assumption that I want to get at. Not just whether or not, and I'm not necessarily interested in whether or not that assumption is right or wrong, because I assume that assumption is informed by the way that we have experienced the police. So it's informed by our individual experiences or stories that we've heard, people, our friends and loved ones, and their experiences of the Nigerian police. I'm also interested in what to do when that assumption pans out to be true. So when in fact you're having a negative experience with the Nigerian police force, how do you navigate this? Or what are the legal scaffolding? What are the laws that you have on your side? What are the statutory prescriptions that you have on your side? And what are the practical ways that you can deal with it beyond laws and just the reality of things? So the key phrases here are youths, rights, police profiling. And this is an interesting one because I don't imagine that a lot of us would have assumed that this is a key phrase as well. But for the purposes of this discussion, also dealing with. So I mean, youths, we're all youths on the call. In fact, if you take the Nigerian situation as indicative, you are youth up until your 60s and maybe even your 70s. I'm just going to leave that joke at that. And so we can assume that, being folks in the university, so Edison informed me that this conversation is particularly geared towards university folks. We can assume that we're all youths. But also rights. So we also want to understand what are the legal entitlements, both constitutional, statutory, even administrative legal entitlements that the average Nigerian youth, the average Nigerian citizen is entitled to when they're dealing with the Nigerian police. We also want to engage with what it means when we say police profiling. And finally, the last phrase, dealing with. What I hope to do with that is go beyond the legal prescriptions to practical things that we can do, both while, dealing with the Nigerian police in like just everyday engagement, but also while dealing with the Nigerian police when, unfortunately, we hope this doesn't happen, but if one is in detention or one has been apprehended, like what are the practical ways that you can deal with things like that? So the first thing is, what is profiling? Again, this was a part where I was going to have us share our ideas on what profiling is, but we can leave that towards the end of the conversation and have a conversation around, if we've had experiences with profiling and how we've navigated that. But profiling essentially is assuming things about a person or people based off of how that person looks or has presented themselves. And a good synonym for that would be stereotyping. And profiling within the context of the Nigerian police force is actually a criminology term. I believe it was first used in England to try to build out a profile of what a criminal might look like. So to build out an image of what a criminal might look like even before you've met the criminal. So people who watch police procedural shows will see things like, and so just giving the clues that we see in this crime scene, we can assume that the criminal is 6 feet tall, a man, walks with one leg and has long hair. So that is profiling, right? Like that's the origins of profiling. It's, you don't know for sure, but you can assume, just given what we can see, that this person is this. And from that practice, we've now built out into, we see a person, we don't know the truth about the person, but we can assume that the person is engaged in criminality. So to give examples of profiling beyond police profiling, an example would be if you see a man wearing his hair in locks, and instead of assuming that that man is an artist or even a tech bro, you then assume that he's in a gang or is into fraud, that he's dangerous. Or you see a man carrying a laptop, instead of assuming that he, again, is a tech bro or a creative type, a songwriter, a song producer, you assume that he's using that laptop for fraud. Or if you see a woman dressed in a way that we personally, by our own personal standards, we feel is immodest or too revealing, then we transfer our own personal standards of morality to that woman and then assume things about her morality. If we see a young man or a woman driving a car that we personally think, oh, it's too big for them to be driving at this age, instead of assuming that perhaps their parents gave it to them or they're even, helping out a boss or someone, we assume that they're into fraud. And I've used these examples to show that, obviously the conversation for today is police profiling, but there are ways in which we ourselves also participate in profiling, right? And our own assumptions that we make about people, the negative things that we map onto people just based off of how they present or how they look, sometimes tallies with how the police also does their own profiling of us, right? And so our own personal practices of profiling sometimes informs or creates justifications for the police's, extra statutory, extra constitutional, extra judicial actions that we're complaining of. And so I want us to, I'm not going to engage with that fully here, but I want us after this conversation to think about the ways that we have also participated in profiling and how we can also dismantle that aspect from our lives. In my conversation with Edison yesterday, one of the things that came up, unsurprisingly, is I see somebody's hands raised. I'm not sure if that is deliberate, but I think it might be useful to sort of keep questions until after the end of the session, just so that things run a little more smoothly, if that's okay with us. Yeah,
yes,
so
that's better for us. Thank you.
So in my conversation with Edison yesterday, one of the things that came up was, and this is not surprising, the NSAS protest. The photo I showed at the beginning of this discussion was my participating in the protest, but then I was in New York, so we did it in front of the embassy. But I know that, the protest happened across, different jurisdictions in Nigeria. And some of what the protest was particularly about, in fact, I think the core inciting incident for the protest is police profiling, right? The police see somebody doing something, see somebody moving with locks in their hair, see somebody carrying a laptop, and uses that as their justification to harass the person. And we were protesting that when it comes to what the police does. But I think it's useful to go a step further to ask ourselves, are there ways in which we also assume when we see these people that they are doing something negative? And so it's useful to dismantle it at the level of the police, but it's even particularly more useful to dismantle it at the level of society. And since all of us, you and I, are all society, it's useful for us to search our minds, search our hearts, and figure out how we can dismantle that. So what are some of the important rights to consider when we're thinking about police profiling and engaging with the Nigerian police force? So of course, I don't know how many law students we have on the call. I know that there are some lawyers and law students who are part of the foundation. I'm not going to assume that the audience is a law-educated audience. So we're going to get very basic. We know that we have the Constitution, which is presumably the grand norm, the founding document of the country. And the Constitution in Chapter 4 gives us what is colloquially thought of as the Bill of Rights. So the list of fundamental human rights that every citizen, including Nigerian youths, are entitled to, including when they are navigating or dealing with the Nigerian police force. And I have taken out some of the rights that I think are critical when it comes to the issue of police profiling. And some of them are not very obvious, so it'll be interesting to discuss it. The first one is the right to privacy. Because the average Nigerian, per the Constitution, is entitled to not be unduly searched. So this is what the right to privacy, the bundle of entitlements that the right to privacy concerns. Your body, your physical body should not be unduly searched. Your personal luggage, so your bag should not be unduly searched. Your home should not be unduly searched. Your devices, your technology should not be unduly searched. And you're entitled, when it comes to the Constitution, to that protection, to not have the police just stop you and search you. The second is the right to freedom of expression, which means that you are entitled to dress or, wear your hair in whatever way you want, to say what you want. I mean, obviously, within limits, and we will talk about those limits, but crucially, the way you dress should not be the reason why the police is entitled to stop you. How you wear your hair should not be the reason why the police is entitled to stop you. What kind of songs you listen to or books you listen to should not on its own signal criminality. That's what the right to freedom of expression means. The right to freedom of association, it means that you're entitled to move in a group with people, and so just seeing people in a group, that on its own should not be a reason why the Nigerian police is entitled to stop you. Seeing people sitting down together in a place does not on its own signal criminality. You are entitled under the law to associate yourself with people so long as those people are not overtly engaging in criminality or obviously engaging in criminality. And finally, the right to freedom of movement. You're entitled to move from one place to another. You're entitled to, the crime that is called loitering, whatever that means. You're entitled to just take a stroll, in any neighborhood, and that on its own should not signal criminality. But when the police is engaging in profiling, what they are doing inevitably is violating those rights. They see you, they say you look like, just based off of how you're dressed, you look like someone that is doing this. That's one element of profiling. So we're going to stop you and take your phone and search your person so that you can prove that we are not who we assume you to be. So that's Your right to privacy has been breached. Your right to freedom of expression has been breached. Oh, we saw you just walking in that area close to a garden. And we know that we have decided in our heads that people who walk in that area, we're profiling them as suspicious. And so we're going to stop you and search you so you can prove to us that you're not suspicious. They breached your right to freedom of movement. Oh, we saw you sitting down and having lunch in this particular area. And we have decided that the people who sit down and have lunch in this particular area are inherently suspicious. We've profiled them as suspicious. And so we're going to stop you and search you. They breached your right to freedom of association. So in that sense, we see that police profiling breaches and often involves, or often implicates all these levels of rights, your right to privacy, your right to freedom of expression, your right to freedom of association, and your right to freedom of movement. Now, if you've been listening closely, one of the things you will have, what you would have picked up in what I've said so far is that the police, like, you're entitled to these rights normally, right? So without more, you are entitled to privacy, freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of movement. But it's also the truth that criminality often uses these rights as its cover, right? So the only way to actually do police investigation is, for example, to when you have proper suspicion, get a search warrant and search. So that in some ways breaches your right to privacy. Or perhaps people, like, there's a legitimate concern that a particular area is a hot zone. And so the police is legitimately concerned, or a police force can potentially be legitimately concerned that this space is a hot zone. And so if they see people in that area, they are legitimately potentially suspicious of the people. That's also implicating the right to freedom of association, or the right to freedom of movement, or the right to freedom of expression. And so I see all this to say that these rights are not absolute for sure. And there might be instances where the police might be justified in skating the boundaries of this right for the purposes of actually doing police work. But the crucial thing to remember is that the people who drafted the Constitution, the people who decided on these rights, were not unaware that police activity would require, navigating around these rights. And still, we have set in our Constitution that these rights are fundamental and are basic. And so it is not our law that the innocent person should pay the price for the presumption or for past incidents of criminality. It is not in our law that because criminals have previously used the right to freedom of privacy as a way to protect their criminal activity, that all of a sudden, all innocent people should not have the right to privacy. Rather, the spirit of our law is that it is better to have an innocent person protected, even if the price is that sometimes some criminals might get away. And so I'm giving this to you as background so you appreciate the spirit of the legal protections, at least on paper, that shapes the Nigerian society. Like, this is how we ideologically, philosophically think about how we want the average Nigerian to move protected by our legal systems. Are you with me? Can somebody just put in the chat if they're with me? I'm not really able to sort of get audience feedback, but I hope we're good to go. Edison, I'm looking at you. Give me a nod or yes, good. So the next thing I wanted to consider is the rights that you also hold if in some unfortunate circumstance you have been apprehended, detained, often unlawfully by the Nigerian police. Now, the first thing is that you have a right against, in fact, even before that, actually, even before the right against self-incrimination, because you have a right to privacy, right? Your one core right when you're dealing with the Nigerian police is that you have a protection from undue search. So they cannot search you except they have a search warrant. They cannot come into your home except, they have a lawful court order that allows them to enter into your home. To do that would be trespass. I know, Edison, you and I had a conversation yesterday about whether or not law enforcement agents can break down your door. They usually cannot do that, right? Even when they have a court order, right? It's because, again, the performance of police searches or law enforcement searches so closely implicates rights that we have considered so important that we have put them in our constitution and call them fundamental rights, right? And one of those core rights is the privacy of your home. It is supposed to only be in very exceptional circumstances, often in instances where they think, there is like danger to life, or there is danger in the evidence being, destroyed, that they're actually allowed to break into your home or break down the door or things like that. And that's also if they have a search warrant or a warrant that allows them to enter into your home. So a search warrant for the property, not just a search warrant for your person or a search warrant for your car, but an actual search warrant for the actual property in which they are trying to enter. So assuming they have a search warrant, assuming that they have an arrest warrant perhaps, and unfortunately one finds themselves in police detention, what are some of, again, the legal pillars that we have to protect us even in those situations? The first is the right against self-incrimination. This is also within the Constitution. The way we think about it colloquially is the right to silence, right? You have a right to say nothing while you're in police custody, and your silence should not be construed against you. Now, when I was in Nigeria, I went to criminal court once or twice, but I'm in like the civil jurisdiction. But the one thing that I know that all my colleagues who practice, both in Nigeria, in the US, in Canada, practice within criminal law, even in the UK, what they tell their clients is, say nothing. If you're going to say something, say, I want my lawyer. Say nothing, answer no questions. Because whatever it is you say, and if I was in the room with you, I would ask you to chorus it with me. Whatever it is you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. So say nothing, even if you know that you have reasons, you have excuses, you want to protect yourself, you can answer the question and protect yourself, say nothing. Because indeed, whatever it is you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. The reality of policing is that a lot of detective work works with trying to poke holes in ordinary stories. So if, for example, I call you up, just in fact, this morning, and I say, okay, so what were you doing 8 p.m. yesterday night? That's just yesterday. I can't remember what I was doing 8 p.m. yesterday night. The average person can't remember what they're doing 8 p.m. yesterday night. But if you're in police custody and you are presumably under suspicion, it will be read as suspicious that you cannot remember what you were doing 8 p.m. yesterday night, right? And so the right to silence is not given to you because they presume you to be hiding something. It's given to you because we appreciate that detective work is often working from presumption of suspicion. And people look suspicious if you're looking for suspicious things. Like if you're looking for suspicious people, everybody would look suspicious, right? And so the right to silence allows you to protect yourself until, you have someone like a lawyer, for example, who is able to, with a more like trained eye and clear head, help you navigate the situation. Second thing then is that you have a right to an attorney, which is what I'm saying. Say nothing except to say, I want an attorney. And again, this is a right that you're entitled to both under the Constitution as well as under different statutes. And even, and I should have mentioned this earlier, we also have things like the rules of court, which are also an important way in which like fair hearing is preserved. We have international legal instruments like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or the African Human Rights Charter. These are international instruments that Nigeria has signed on to. And in these international laws, we also have like legal prescriptions that protect an individual when they're having to navigate law enforcement. So one of those rights is also the right to an attorney. The important thing that an attorney does is that they are trained in the procedure that the law enforcement officer is also trained in, that you are not trained in. And so they can act as an intermediary They can figure out what questions you should answer, how you should answer that question, because they know what those answers, how those answers, they can presume how those answers will be interpreted. And so when you are speaking through an attorney, you're more likely able to avoid self-incrimination in a way that you might not be able to if you're just speaking as a lay person. And even if if, for example, I, who am trained as an attorney, if I have, unfortunately, a negative incident with the police, because I am so personally closely connected with that incident, it would be to my benefit to, one, exercise my right to silence, my right against self-incrimination, and two, my right to an attorney. It's better for me to outsource my engagement with the police through an attorney because they are one step removed from the situation. And so they are better able to navigate the situation, even though I have legal training and I can advise the third person on how they can navigate the police. So it's something about your personal implication that that would benefit from your being able to access, some of these rights to protect you. The third is that you have a right to bail under certain circumstances. So often if it's not a capital offense, often if it's not a felonious offense. So a felony is a serious offense, I think 3 years imprisonment or a lifetime, 3 years imprisonment or more would be considered a felony. So if it's a misdemeanor, if it's a simple offense, you're often entitled to bail. And what the phrase entitlement means is that you shouldn't have to pay for bail, especially if it's police bail. So if it's bail that is not associated with the court, sometimes the court would require like a surety, would require you to, would place a cost on bail just to prevent anybody from absconding from the bail conditions. But if it's a police bail, if it's a bail to be granted in the police station, you ordinarily and by law should not have to pay for that, and you are entitled to that. The fourth is that you have a right to dignity. And this is one that I think both the police, including people who are victims of the police, do not often foreground. So even if the police like duly suspects that a person has been, that a person is engaged in criminality, the right to dignity means that you don't then go and drag a person and remove their clothes and malhandle them or torture them, right? Because you're trying to exercise police functions. The right to dignity means that even in instances, and so I say this to say, even people who are convicted of a crime, and there's been case law where a person who has been convicted of a crime because of how they are treated in police custody is still, the court will find that their right to dignity has been violated. The right to dignity, I think of it, and this is not necessarily the law, but this is how I interpret it. The right to dignity preserves for us as a society our own sense of self. It's not just about, oh, that person has done something. It's also about, are we the sort of people who will treat a human being that way, right? And so it's a right that holds a mirror to society. Are we the sort of people who are comfortable watching somebody be malhandled, be rough-handled, be treated in an inhumane way because we presume, and often wrongly, and I'm sure all of us can think about instances where people have presumed criminality on someone only to find out that our assumptions were wrong. The right to dignity prevents us from, even if we are right or wrong, from behaving like brutes, from behaving like animals, because we presume that somebody has done something wrong. So the right to dignity, at first instance, is to protect the individual, but in a more philosophical way, it is to protect us as society from becoming animalistic, from acting like as if we don't have feelings or we are not capable of putting ourselves in the shoes of the people that we're dealing with. Within the context of the police, the right to dignity keeps the police force professional, keeps the police force humane in how it navigates its law enforcement, beyond also protecting the individual. And so with if a person's right to dignity has been violated, right? I mean, unfortunately, it's a right that is wielded after the fact, right? To exercise or to ensure that you can and I'm trying not to use the legal term, but to ensure that you can enforce, I guess, your right to dignity, it has to be after the fact. The violation has to have occurred, and then you go to court to enforce it, as opposed to your right to an attorney, right? So if, for example, you allege that the police denied you an attorney, it means that perhaps whatever statements they're taking from you after denying you, your right to an attorney will not be admissible, and that's a legal term, but they can't use it in court against you, right? And so that's a right that you can wield as a sword, right? You can say, you know what, I asked for a lawyer, you didn't give me a lawyer, you made me say these things, and so now this thing that I've said, you cannot use it against me. That you can wield as a sword. Or the right against self-incrimination. I said I wanted to keep silent. You said I must speak or else. So I felt compelled to say something. But because you have violated my rights against self-incrimination, now those statements I use, you can't use them again. Those statements I made, you can't use them against me. That you can wield as a sword. Your right to bail, you can go to court and say, I'm entitled to bail, so, and the legal phrase will be habeas corpus. So courts give an order to have me released from custody because I'm entitled to bail. But the right to dignity is slightly different. What you'll be saying is, the police has treated me badly. The police has been violent towards me. The police has violated me. There's nothing you do that can reverse that violation. All you can perhaps ask for is damages, right? And so it's a delicate type of right. And within the same sphere of like delicate rights that are only useful after the fact is also the right to life, right? There is nothing that justifies law enforcement. Well, if you think about the right to life under the Constitution, it is limited by policing power. Well, when the police is attempting to apprehend offenders, sometimes they're allowed to, under the Constitution, it's a limitation. But overall, generally, right, you have a right to life. Police enforcement should not curtail your right to life, should not impugn your right to life. There's nothing the police is doing in terms of law enforcement that entitles them to kill someone because they're trying to apprehend a criminal, generally speaking. But like the right to dignity, it's something that we can only wield after the fact. So it's after the violation that you can then go to court and say, oh, I want to enforce my right to life. And usually it comes down to damages. And how much money can you throw after a violation? Like how much money can solve the harm that is caused by a breach of dignity or a breach of the right to life? So these are the rights that you have. But we have to be realistic, right? It's one thing to know that you have the rights. It's one thing to even say that you have the rights, but it's a different thing whether or not the police will hear you when you say that you have the right to life, or if it will not even aggravate them when you tell them that you know your rights. And so the next portion of this conversation, let me see how much time we have. I think we do have some time left. The next portion of this conversation is to figure out what to do practically. So beyond the systems of law, beyond the pillars that the law has given to us to protect us. When we are faced with a situation where we have to deal with the police practically, what can we do? And at this point, I'm going to call in a lot of audience interaction. So we're getting towards the point of audience interaction, but I will share like some of the tips that I have learned. So I lived in Nigeria. I know that I'm not currently in Nigeria at the moment, but I lived in Nigeria for a long time up until adulthood. In fact, I was well in my 20s by the time I left. And so if you've lived up until your 20s in Nigeria, you've had enough instances to have to encounter and engage with the Nigerian police. And I can give you an example of a situation that I found myself in, and so that we feel comfortable sharing. This is a safe space here, right? I had started working at the time. I was working in a law firm. In fact, I think I had been to criminal court a few times already by that point. So I say all this to say I knew my rights. I could tell you where in the Constitution, I had learned the Constitution. I could cite section 33, 34, 35, 36 if you ask me. And I was working in a law firm. And I was coming back home from the law firm, and it was late. And then the police stopped us, so my colleague and I who were driving, and said, you know, where are you coming from at this time of the night? I have a right to movement. I shouldn't have to answer those questions, right? So who is this person now? How do you know them? I have a right to freedom of association. I shouldn't have to answer those questions. Come down from the car. They're going to, and open your boot. I have a right to privacy. You shouldn't be able to do that. And I will admit, I started to say why. But why should we have to do that? And my friend said, don't be angry, sir. Please, I will come down and open the boot, right? And so that gets to the practical way of dealing with it, the way of understanding how to navigate beyond what you know to be your right. And eventually, in fact, I had to like then call my mom, because we're close to my house already, call my mom. Then she had to come and like do the Nigerian mother thing of, oh, please, officer, don't be sorry, right? But I say all this to say there's a difference between what the law says and what is happening when you find yourself at 11 p.m. making your way home and the police has stopped you and everything they're doing is contrary to what you know the law says they can do. The first thing I would advise, and this is coming from some of the tips that were also shared during the NSAS protests, is use technology as a tool to create a record of your experience. And I don't know how many of us use social media now, but I think we can see how social media has been crucial to how we as a people are able to push back against police violence, push back against police profiling. And that social media check is anchored on the fact that you have a record of what happened. So it's not just a he said, she said. Because the truth is that the police is a government institution. And so when you say the police has done something wrong, what you're saying is that the government, Nigeria, in reality, what you're saying is Nigeria or Lagos State or Sokoto or Owerri, like the government has done something wrong. And so if you are charging the government with something wrong, you don't want to get into, or it's not ideal to be in a he said, she said contestation with the government. Because ultimately, compared to the government, you're a small person. The way to give yourself an edge in that sort of situation is use technology as a tool to create a record of your experience. And there are many ways we can use technology in this way. One, we can use it to keep people informed of our movement. And I know that as young people, we don't like that part. Why should I have to tell people where I'm going? I get it, like we're adults now, we're in the university now, presumably some of us, it's the first time outside of secondary school that we're experiencing this sort of freedom. And that freedom feels curtailed when you always have to, and the way we would say it in my language, Yoruba, is dagberi, tell somebody where you're going all the time. You don't like to do that as a young person. But there have been many instances where it is because somebody told somebody that this is where they are going, that if they meet the police and the police, has a negative interaction with them and maybe detains them, that people can trace their movement. So it is crucially important when the more adult people that are in our lives are saying, oh, where are you going? It's not because they want to just collect information or because they're interested in monitoring. Because to monitor someone is not easy. Do you know what it means to be monitoring people? It's not an easy task. It's a full day's work. And most adults have other things they can do with their time. But it's because they know the reality that having that information is crucial to intervening if there's a problem. So even when I travel to places, right, I have like my circle of people that know where I am, that I share my location with if I'm going out in a new place, so that whatever happens, right, somebody somewhere can say, as at this time, this is where they were, and then we can take it from there. This is where they said they were going. We saw them here this time, and then they met the police, and then now we can no longer find them, right? So all those steps are crucial to practically dealing with when you meet the police in a negative way. A second way to use technology, and I'm sure a lot of us in this conversation have cell phones, is to record, right? Creates, as safely as you can. If it's only audio recording, you can do the audio recording. If it's video recording, you can do the video recording. Try to record the interaction, because that record will be crucial for, one, if you have to share it on social media so people can see what happened, or if you have to go to court. So it cannot be a situation of, they were doing this and that's why we apprehended them. The video shows that you were going on your own way and then the police stopped you and then they said, open your phone, right? Sometimes it's even useful, and we've seen some videos that have made it around on social media. It's useful if the police just even know that you are recording. It doesn't always pan out that way, but if you say, I'm recording you, that creates a check in the police officer themselves, right? So then they know to act differently. They know that they're like, this interaction is not just between both of you, it's between you, them, and potentially everybody else, so potentially the whole world who gets to see the video. We saw in the context of NSAS, right? Some of the reason why we were able to then get a panel of inquiry set up. And I don't know how many of us read like the report from the panel of inquiry, but one of the things that was crucial to how the panel made the decision was, well, we saw that people recorded, live streamed, uploaded, the incident that happened in Lekki. So you cannot now subsequently say it did not happen. Because at first there was oh, no, nothing happened. But these videos existed, these records existed, and so there was no way to deny it. So the first thing is, as much as possible, keep people informed of your movement. If that is even in just saying, this is where I'm going. If that is in sharing your location, if it's possible, with somebody you trust. The second thing is use technology as a tool to create a record of your experience. The third thing is use social media. So sometimes using social media is not always in, and again, I have seen people do this, especially during the NSAS time. It's not always in recording and uploading, it's in texting. I was here, it's in posting. This is how my age is showing when I say it's in texting. It's in posting on social media, I was here and I have been picked up by the police. I don't know where they're taking me. Oh, this is what I can see right now around me. As much as possible, just, if you find yourself, especially in a delicate situation, social media can be a very useful tool to protect you and to create, something of a safety net in the eyes of the public in how you engage with the police. Oh no, so I can't see, okay. Share important details with people around you. Remember, so this one is also in a situation where if you are apprehended in public, and this tip I learned from, during the NSAS experience. It's usually a very rowdy situation if the police is like stopping you in public and trying to apprehend or detain you. If you can, anybody, just start shouting, because often what it is somebody else is recording that situation, right? So just say, this is my name, your first name, your full name, and a phone number of somebody trusted that they can contact on that incident, right? And so in that way, at least somebody in your close circle, there's a higher possibility that somebody in your close circle is aware. So you might not be able to pull up your phone, you might not be able to use technology to create a record of your experience, you might not have access to social media, you might not have kept somebody informed of your movement. Maybe you said, let me just go down the road and buy, and now you're going to see some of my favorite snacks, puff puff or akara. And then in that situation is where the police is intervening, right? Some of the things that can be crucial to saving your life is just start saying, this is my name, this is my first, my last name, call this person, just say it out, shout it as loudly as you can, and hopefully somebody has recorded it, somebody will make that call, and then somebody that you know and trust will be aware of at least the situation. Because one of the more difficult things when people are apprehended by the police without anybody knowing is that nobody even knows what happened, right? We've seen instances where people just be like, and then our child, our son, our daughter, our brother, uncle just went missing. We don't know what we don't know, right? But if you have done this other step of just sharing your name and an important phone number with with the world, just shout it out into the world, at least there's a higher possibility that somebody will know something. So at this point, when we're saying practically dealing with with police profiling, we're trying to figure out ways that we can give ourselves the best possible chance of getting, attention to our situation. And now, I don't know if I did that. Okay, well, I'm going to say it anyway, because I don't think I put it on the, slide. But the last one I was going to say, if, for example, that you then find yourself, unfortunately, in police custody, so you did not tell anybody where you were going. You were not able to use technology to record. You were not able to use social media. You were not able to share the important details when you were being apprehended. The final thing that you might potentially be able to do is, if you are then in detention, share those important details with somebody who is in detention with you, because you don't know who will get out first, right? So if there's somebody in detention who, finds a way to get out, let them know. Scribble it on a sheet of paper, give it to them, let them know who they can contact on their behalf. We've seen so many instances, especially within the context of NSAS, where it is because somebody came out of detention and they now said, oh, and then I met this person there. This is the person's name. This is the phone number that the person gave me, that then we're now able to go and trace. Some of the folks who worked in the legal team during the NSAS, incident, talked about how sometimes, so the information that they will get is, we have 10 people in detention. And so they are working on trying to get those 10 people out. As those 10 people are coming out, they're telling them, oh no, there are 2 more people that are still there that were detained and nobody knew they were detained. So, these are their names. They gave me their names. They gave me the phone number of their family members. Oh, and then 10 becomes 20, 20 becomes 30. And God forbid any one of us finds ourselves in that situation. Also be that person for someone, right? If you're able to, maybe at the point where you were being detained, you were able to keep somebody informed about your movement, you were able to use technology, use social media, share important details. And so because of that, you are able to get out. As you're making your way out, be that source for somebody who was not able to do this thing. Let somebody use you to get in touch with their loved ones so that they can also, pay it forward, right? So for me, so far, that's what I understand to be practical ways beyond what we know to be our legal protections to keep ourselves protected when we have to deal with police in a negative way. Now, I debated whether or not to include this slide, because I know that for a lot of us, what we're encountering when we encounter the police is that we are the victims, right, of the police exercise of power or excessive violence by the police, violations of our rights. We are in the victim context. But there are also other ways in which we perhaps perpetuate, without knowing, the culture that allows the police to do that. And it's in small ways, right? It's that maybe you have an uncle in the police force and somebody has offended you. Like you and maybe you have beef in the hostel. Outside of anything like criminal matter, somebody ate and this is a ridiculous example, but somebody went into your pot and ate food that you kept. Somebody went into your cupboard and ate food that you kept. I mean, technically, it's a crime. They stole, technically. But it's not a crime that should involve the police. But then you have a police uncle. So you call your uncle and then they come and pick up the person. Or you have a brother who is in the military. So you call the person to come and pick up the person, right? In that situation, perhaps you feel like, you're using the police to protect yourself. But then that other person is experiencing police violence because of how you have used the police. So if the overarching theme of this conversation is how to figure out how to dismantle the culture of police violence, the culture of dysfunction in our criminal justice system, how to figure out how to dismantle police profiling, it's a good thing to figure out how we can protect ourselves and what are the legal grounds that we have for protecting ourselves. But it's also useful to figure out what we should not do so that the culture itself ceases to exist. Don't invite the police into matters that the police have no business being invited into. only because you have access to the police, right? The culture of police violence, police dysfunction thrives because in many small ways, we also, allow the police, when it benefits us, to intervene in things they have no business intervening in. So it's not just about things we can do, it's also about things that we should stop doing when we think about how to dismantle the culture. And that's the thought I want to leave us with. We know what we can do, we know what we should do, but we should also think about things that we should stop doing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I can see that even me, I've learned a whole lot. And so I think now we can begin to, we can allow them ask their questions, raise their hands, right? You say you want to hear their experiences and all, maybe from a few of them. Okay, so we can use this time now to do that.
And not just your experience, but because obviously I don't know it all. So for example, I'm giving you tips on practical ways you can deal with police. Some people might have other examples, other practical tips, share with us so that all of us can learn, because we're all learning here together. So not just the experience is useful, but also tips that you might have that I've not mentioned.
Okay. Wow, we have a whole lot of them here. I hope I can. Do you want to control that from your end?
Question is, please explain more on the right to privacy. So I'm reading from the Q&A right now. Please explain
Okay, so
more
you're
on
not
the
taking
right.
their hands any longer.
Okay, I can take their hands first. Do you want me to take their hands first?
Okay. Oh, sorry, we can't hear you again.
So where would I see the hands? I don't think I can see the hands.
Okay. It's just showing that, okay, let me see.
You want to control that? If you can just
Yes,
control it, that would
yes.
be fine.
So I want to see, I can do that from here. Okay, so I'm going to take Bumi Victoria. Bumi, I'm going to allow you to speak now. So I have unmuted you. So Bumi, you can speak. Okay, let me take Benchika. I can hear. Benchika, you can speak. You just need to unmute yourself.
We try to take the Q&As then, if
Okay,
it's a little
take
too
the
clunky.
yeah. Let's take
Okay.
the Q&As. I don't think
So
most of them know how to.
please explain more on the right to privacy and incrimination. So I'm not sure what you mean by explain more, but I will repeat as much as I can. So it's that you have a right to privacy. That right to privacy means that, the police or the government, so it's a right that creates a protection against government interference. So the police or the government cannot come search your person. The language in the Constitution is search your correspondence, search your home, so your letters, the things that you use to communicate, your phones. The police cannot come and search, right? But part of the criminal procedural system, part of evidence gathering, is they have to search the scene of the crime. They have to search the places that they suspect of criminality to get that evidence. And so the right to privacy and like the criminal justice procedure is often in tension, right? Like they're bumping up against each other. One is trying to protect you. The other is sort of a consequence of the kind of work that the police does. But on a larger whole, what our Constitution says is that the law prioritizes protecting the individual, especially the innocent individual, notwithstanding what the police has to do, which is why for the police to then say they want to come in and search, the law says go and get a search warrant. To get a search warrant, you have to prove to the court that there is a reasonable suspicion that criminality is happening here, it has to be narrowly tailored. You have to say, this is the place, this is the only place we want to search. This is why we think it's important for us to search this place. This is what we think we're going to find when we search this place. So all those checks within the court system that would then allow a court to grant the police, the search warrants, is a way of still ensuring that the right to privacy is protected, but still law enforcement is able to navigate their duties. But always the priority is the right to privacy. The right to privacy is also in some ways part of the reason why you have the right to the right against self-incrimination, right? It's that even though, and perhaps, we're not going to assume that everybody is innocent and nobody has done anything wrong, right? But the right to privacy is that even when a person has done something wrong, right, we still remain a society that is interested in prioritizing a set of atmosphere in which people are protected by the law. We're not a dictatorship. So that's how the democratic state makes its claim about its democracy, about not being a dictatorship or an authoritarian state, is that it protects under the law the way an individual lives their life. So I hope that makes that clear.
Okay. I want to make it a bit easy for you. So Martha is on now. She's going to take the important questions so that you're not going through everything. Okay. All right. So Martha, we're good. You're muted, Martha.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much, Ma, for this insightful webinar. So I would be reading out questions from the Q&A, and we trust you to do justice to those questions. Thank you once again. Okay, so we have a question here that says, why do some people spend years in custody without even trial? And what do we do if we know someone being held in custody for a long time without trial? So this is a two-in-one question. Over to you, Ma.
Yes, so thank you, Martha. And again, it's my pleasure to be here. And that's a really important question. The very simple and direct answer is people spend years in custody without trial because the police is violating their law and their rights. Like, it's illegal, it's unlawful to hold someone in custody without trial. I think the law, in fact, often stipulates a set number of days that you can hold people in custody pending investigation. So it's because the system is broken that it's happening. But then the other part of the question is, what can we do? So we know what the rights are. We know that the rights are being violated. How can we practically deal with it? To use the court system to practically deal with it, right, we have something called a writ of habeas corpus in court. And any criminal lawyer will be familiar with this, which is where you file to the court, you let the court know that a person is being held unlawfully. And the translation of a writ of habeas corpus is produce the person. Like, the court will direct the police or the state or the government to produce the person who's been held unlawfully. But these things are so technical that often, as a practical, to be truly, truly practical about it, one, get a lawyer and have a lawyer navigate it. But two, social media can be a really, really useful tool, right? If you know, as a matter of fact, that a person is being held in custody, a person is being held unlawfully in custody, social media can be a really good way to call attention to that illegality. We have members of the police force file and rank on social media, receiving requests, receiving attention, or receiving complaints from people. And so that's a way to generate buzz on social media about unlawful police activity is a good way to call attention and to invite police intervention. But of course, to know that the person is being held in police custody means that, like some of the things that we've discussed earlier about practical tips, it's crucial to us being able to know that the person is being held in police custody, right? So you know that the person has shared that where they were going. We know that they've been picked up, or they've shared with people, and they've somehow gotten news out about where they are being held, because that's also a critical part that the police can hide under. So if you say a person is being held in Banti, and Banti can say, oh, we don't have that person, and they truly don't have the person because the person is being held in like Sabo police station, right? So you also need to be sure about your information so that there's no room to hide. To say, this is where the person is being held. We know the person is being held here. We have proof that the person is being held here. Release the person. So get a lawyer. The lawyer knows how to file and what to file in what court, but also practically social media pressure, public pressure, not even necessarily social media, just public pressure can be a really useful tool for advocacy to get people out. There are also NGOs. So I don't know if Dami is on this call, but there are NGOs that work with people who have been unlawfully detained. We can reach out to them. And they also are more familiar with the system, more likely like know things that you and I would not know because they work more closely in that system about steps that they can take practically to get people out. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ma. Okay, so we have another question here that says, good morning, Ma. You talked about right to incrimination and silence. What will one who is ignorant of this right as a citizen of Nigeria do when found being violated of his rights to incrimination, I think?
Yeah, so it's right to freedom from self-incrimination. So you don't have a right to incriminate yourself. You have a right to not incriminate yourself. So that's the right to silence, a right to freedom from incrimination, from self-incrimination. So usually and often what happens is if the police violates this procedure, when you know the matter gets to court, they can be penalized for it. But usually what happens is when the police apprehend someone, they're supposed to inform you. So that thing we say, you have a right to silence, because everything you say will be used against you. That's the police informing you of your rights to freedom from self-incrimination, your rights against self-incrimination. So pay attention to if the police said it or if they did not say it. Because if they did not say it, it's something you can let your lawyers know, and then your lawyers can raise it in court. Typically, everything you say before the police tells you about your right to, or your right against self-incrimination, everything you say should not be admissible in court because it's things that were said before the police informed you of your right. But again, we know that what is the law doesn't always pan out in reality. In fact, what happens, what usually happens as the legal procedure is that then the court will then conduct a trial within trial to figure out, if in fact you were forced to say what you said, if the police, maybe like tortured you, and like sort of the kind of weight to attach to that evidence. So it's a legal technicality, to be sure. But that's what the law says. You have a right to freedom from incrimination, you have a right against self-incrimination, 1. 2, if that right is violated, you can turn to the court for redress. Again, how much weight we should put on that legal prescription is a different matter altogether. But again, I would also encourage you, because the thing is, I think about rights, legal rights, as things that grow in strength based off of how often we enforce it, right? So the more people know their rights and the more people exercise their rights and use their rights, the less the police is likely to be to try to violate that right. So more and more, it's like doing exercise, doing push-ups. The more you do exercise, the more like you grow your muscles, and then the more you can achieve the goal that you want to achieve. So we're also in a collective exercise here. We're doing collective advocacy. If you say you know your right, and that person says they know their right, and that person exercises their right, and that person and that person and that person, eventually it transforms the culture of law enforcement, because then they are aware that people know their rights, and so they cannot just compel people to act in violation of that right.
Yeah, thanks.
So again, it's a right to freedom from self-incrimination, a right against self-incrimination. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ma. We have Divine asked this question. It says, regarding the right to life, mostly the...
Oh, okay. I don't know if it's from my end, but I think she's frozen. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think she's frozen on my end as well. I can hear you.
Okay. So let's take Madam Fodo University, we have their hands raised up there. You guys can unmute, then we can take your question once you have done that. But before then, let me continue from somebody here says, yeah, my question is, as a student, how do we have access to attorney of our own, especially when fees has not been paid? So of course, I don't know how you want to answer that. Okay.
No. It's a really good question. It's a really, really good question. It's a question that goes to, and I again, this is why I say I like having this kind of conversations, because we're talking to each other and we understand the reality of things, right? Like we're trying to figure these things out practically. So it's a really good question. First of all, I'll tell you what's like the legal provisions are. So the legal provision is that, in fact, under the Constitution as well as under the rules of court, you are entitled to an attorney. If you cannot provide one, the court or the state will provide one for you. So you have things like the Office of the Public Defender that under normal circumstances should be able to provide legal services to people who cannot afford it free of charge, because the government should pay for it. But again, we know that that's not always a reliable option. The second option is we have really effective, I know that Nigeria has really effective NGOs that do really good work free of charge to intervene in situations for people who cannot afford to pay attorney fees. So that's also a really good option, right? To get in touch with some of these NGOs. But again, the NGOs are swamped. There's a lot of demand and there's only so much they can do. So we also have to appreciate the practical limitations that the NGOs face. A third way is to crowdsource, and again, it goes back to, and it's a little unfortunate that this is how we then have to begin to think about it. Like this is a sign that the system is not working as intended, when we have to start figuring out extra systemic ways to protect the rights to an attorney. But we can crowdsource. I've seen incidents where people reach out on social media with legal concerns, and people pick up their causes and help them out in that regard. Another way is to just have, so the person might not be a lawyer, but to just have someone, friend or family, who is familiar with the law and who might be able to do that advocacy on your behalf. So sort of in your interactions with the police, do that advocacy. They might themselves not be a lawyer, so they cannot represent you in court, but just familiarity with the law and with the legal process is always an advantage, is always an edge. The ideal situation would be to be able to afford a lawyer. The next best thing would be to have access to the public defender. The next best thing would be have access to NGOs that do this work. The next best thing would be to have, a public campaign that can secure for you, an attorney. The next best thing is to have someone who might not be an attorney, but who's familiar with the law, or even you yourself not being an attorney, but who has familiarized yourself enough with the prescriptions of the law that you can self-advocate in such situations.
Okay, thank you. I think Mata is back, yeah.
Yeah, so sorry you couldn't hear me the other time. So let's allow those whose hands are raised. So we have Benchika. Benchika, kindly unmute and then ask your question. Benchika, if you can hear me. All right, go ahead, please.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much for this opportunity. My question is concerning the police bill. She talked about some offenses not needing to pay before you are granted bail. So I just want her to throw more light on that aspect. What crimes do we need to pay before we are granted bail? Or is it just generally, if it is not a felony, we don't need to pay to be granted bail? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Benchika. So the situation is you don't have to pay for bail. So I'm sure, and I don't know if even like you sometimes see in Nollywood movies, like police counters be like, bail is free. Under the law, bail should be free. You don't have to pay for bail. Now, and so especially for police bail, you should not have to pay for police bail. what happens when the court grants bail is that they sometimes, require people to get sureties that have a certain amount of money. They require you to drop your passport. Not that you're paying for the bail, but they're putting down these conditions to ensure that you do not violate the terms of your bail conditions, such as running away. So the idea is if they required you to, I'm trying to remember what the technical term for it is, but if they required you to put down a significant amount of money as your sort of bail collateral, so not payment, but something of a collateral, 5 million naira. It's such a huge sum, perhaps, that you're less likely to then run away. Or if they've asked you to get a surety, so someone, and the surety is usually be somebody who has a job, who works in civil service, who does this. So somebody who has such ties in the community that they cannot just get up and run, right? Because like the bail conditions are set in such a way that it would be difficult for you to then violate the terms of the bail. But it's not that you are paying for the bail. And so the reason why offenses that you can get police bail for, you don't pay for it. First of all, you don't pay for it. But the reason why they sometimes don't even require these bail conditions is because these offenses are usually so minor. So there's no, so if you arrest a person for loitering, right, there's no reason to think that the person will now run away from their family and friends because they're trying to avoid going to court for loitering. So that's the difference. But in all instances, you should not have to pay for bail. When the bail terms are set by the court, it's not that you're paying for it. It's just that they're putting these checks in place so that you don't abscond after you're granted bail. And usually what happens is after the end of the proceedings and the trial, you're entitled to like get back whatever it is you've had to put down as collateral. So you're not paying for bail. You should never have to pay for bail.
All right, thank you so much. So can we have Abdulgafar while we go back to the Q&A? Abdulgafar, kindly unmute and ask your question. If Abdulgafar is not online, can Favor also ask his question?
Yes, I'm online. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning. My name is Abdulgafar Ahmed. I'm a medical student from Usman Danfodio University, Sokoto. So thanks so much for this webinar. It's like an opening eye for a student like me who is into medical and not into legal. I just want to share a recent scenario that occurred in our hostel, and I want you to help me put the legal justice into it. So recently we caught a thief in the hostel, and unfortunately for him, he was beaten to death. And the second day we had police coming to hostel, to ask questions, to the point that the old governor was arrested. So how do you say this? I feel we beating him to death, not me in particular, right? Where I belong to the group of people. So we beating him to death. It's like a self-protection, as I feel. How come? Why should we now be, should be accountable where we try to defend ourselves, where we try to defend our property? So what could you say to that in legal scenario? So thanks so much.
Thank you very much for that question, Dr. Jafar. And actually, so it's interesting because that scenario was some of the things I had in mind when I was talking about the culture of police violence and the things that we do to support the culture of police violence, right? And so on the one hand, right, somebody has stolen, and that's a violation of your property, right? But under the law, in fact, the punishment for theft is not death, right? 1. 2, if the police suspect somebody of stealing, we would all appreciate an outcry against the police killing somebody because they suspected the person stole, right? And so the point I'm making is that even if one apprehends a thief, our reaction to that cannot be then we're justified in killing the person, right? Because that's not, 1, what the law says, 2, what we want our society to be, a society where we we kill somebody because they have stolen for, like, we're not doing jungle justice. We're not taking justice into our own hands. And we see the results of that in the sense that to kill somebody in that situation is then to commit a different crime called murder, which then entitles the police to come in and investigate. Now, the fact that the police is investigating a crime of murder does not mean that the police is entitled to, without more, violate your constitutionally protected rights. But it does mean that they can then go and get a search warrant that would entitle them to search your property, effect lawful arrests where possible, where they suspect that the person has been involved in committing the crime of murder or something, right? And so I don't know what the exact situation is, especially like why they might have apprehended the whole governor. But it will not be a defense for somebody who is apprehended for committing murder to say the person stole, and so that's why we killed the person, because death is not the legal punishment for theft. And even if it were, it is not for individuals to kill. It is for the process of the law to take its place. So even a police officer, it cannot kill somebody who has been apprehended, and should not be. I feel like we will all appreciate that a police officer should not be able to kill somebody because the person has stolen. Rather, it's that the courts should, the court of justice should take its place in the courts of law, and then the courts can pronounce on that situation, right? And all of that is done to ensure that as a society, because think about it, to do like jungle justice and like mass murder a person is to violate fundamentally a person's right to dignity, a person's right to life. And when I was having that discussion, I talked about how some of the crucial elements that the right to dignity and the right to life carries is a reflection of who we are as a society. Are we a society that moves around with bloodlust, such that so this person has given us justification to do this, so we're going to, like, that's not who we want to be as a society, because we make mistakes, right? We don't know what we don't know. And it is precisely because of that the law then has this whole mechanism called the judicial system, where you can take an accused person to, you present your case against them, they present their defense of their case, and then a presumably independent umpire using the law then makes pronouncements about the justice of the situation. It is not justice to kill a person because of a suspicion of them having stolen, or even if you confirm that they did in fact steal. That's not justice. And in fact, the police would then be entitled to come and investigate what is in fact a crime of murder. So that's the balance that we have to figure out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
All right, Martha, just give me a minute. We have Damilola Omotosho on the call. She just needs to do this quickly. I think Olaluwa has asked for her before. So Dami, the floor is yours. She's going to talk about the NGO that offers free legal services. Damilola, if you can hear me, you can unmute now.
Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry my video is off. I hope we've all had a fantastic session with Olaoluwa Awuni. My name is Damilola Omotosho, and I am a volunteer legal practitioner with the Justice Project. Yes, the Justice Project is an initiative of Touch the Word Foundation, an NGO that is being run by Ecclesia Hills Church. They offer not just legal services to inmates of the various correctional centers. We also provide rehabilitation, counseling, and reintegration opportunities to them as well. So it is not enough that somebody is being assisted with the prisons by way of legal services, legal representation in court. They are also afforded the opportunity they are also being able to get jobs, places to live, basically just what they need to reintegrate back into a functioning member of the society and not to return back to crime. So the Justice Project fondly called TJP, provides pro bono legal services. Now, it is not just to inmates of the various prison, the various correctional service centers, but also to juvenile correctional centers. For example, the Oregon Center for Boys, the Yaba Center for Girls, the Ijaraba Center for Girls. And recently, we've started working with correctional centers outside of Lagos. We currently have 2 matters before the Court of Appeal in Akure, and we are representing two people who were accused of, they were arrested on the pretext of stealing palm oil, but then the matter was escalated to armed robbery, and they are currently serving 28 years in prison. So this is what the project, this is what the initiative comes to bridge. Nobody should be spending 28 years in prison for stealing 2 kegs of palm oil. So yes, so that's what we do. And aside from attending to people in correctional centers, we also provide legal pro bono services to where anybody who signs up on our website. At the end of the chat room, I'm going to drop a link to the website for ease of access for any of us who would like to see what the organization do and what we are all about. Thank you so much for your attention, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Damilala. Thank you so much. All right, Martha. So let's take the question from ABTU, and then we can. I think we just have a few minutes more. We're supposed to end this by 11:30. So let's just take the question. ABTU, are you ready?
Hello, my name is Muhammad Aslam Muhammad from Abokatafa Balew University, Bauchi. I have 2 questions to ask. The first one is there any reference from the Constitution for a regulation, a limitation, a restriction in terms of bill? And the second question, can you stand for yourself in the court of law without a law personnel? Is he a lawyer? Thank you.
Yes. So thank you. I'm just going to take the question so that we save time. And also thank you, Damilola, for that intervention. I think everybody should, look into what Dami has shared, because I think it's a really useful program, a really useful foundation that they're working with. So yes, to speak directly to your question, you can represent yourself. It's called pro se. So the person, the legal term, the technical terminology is pro se. The person is representing themselves in court. You can. Often, courts will encourage you to get a lawyer because, lawyering and like court procedures are so technical that you will benefit from having access to someone who has been trained and who is familiar with the procedure. But in the event that you cannot get access to a lawyer, you can represent yourself. And it's usually, which is why I said earlier that if you do have familiarity with the legal process, legal systems, legal prescriptions, it would only be to your benefit in the event that you do have to represent yourself. Or even when you're like engaging with your lawyer too, you can engage with the lawyer fully. So yes, you can represent yourself, which is why you should, as much as possible, familiarize yourself with what the law says. The second one is, are there any constitutional provisions about if bail is free? My instinct is to say, I don't think the Constitution says bail is free, right? But the Constitution says things like you have all these rights. And the way all those rights have been interpreted is that you generally are allowed freedom. So anything that is preventing your freedom is interfering with what the Constitution has prescribed how an individual should be, right? So if you're being detained, if you're being arrested, it's preventing that. So we have statutory provisions, so things like in the Police Act, things like in the rules of court, that would say that, people should not have to pay for bail, but not in the, I don't think you will find in the Constitution bail is free. But the interpretation of all the different prescriptions and freedoms that the Constitution gives, the rights, Chapter 4 of the Constitution, the interpretation of all those bundles of rights is towards freedom. such that anything that is interfering with that freedom is interacting negatively with the prescriptions of the Constitution. And so bail being free is a way to further the constitutional provisions that allow you your freedoms. Does that make sense?
Okay, yes, thank you for answering that. Martha, you can just take one more. Let's just take one more from the attendees. I think with that, we are good so that we don't take too much of this time.
Okay, so someone says, what's the right to do when the police force stops you and asks you to open your phone or any of your gadgets?
So again, that's a question that we can answer in terms of what you are entitled to under the law and what you can do practically. Under the law, the police is not entitled to stop you randomly and ask you to open your phones for no reason, because of all the reasons that we stated. You have a right to privacy, you have a right to freedom of expression, you have protections. But the truth is, sometimes you find yourself confronted with that sort of situation, and that's when you can turn to the practical ways that we have talked about. So ensure that there's a way to record the interaction, try as much as possible. I mean, unfortunately, like you shouldn't have to be this way, but unfortunately it's what it is. Try as much as possible to be civil. Ask them why. Let them appreciate that, you know that this is not consistent with what the law says. If you feel them being belligerent, try as much as possible to keep yourself safe. If that safety means that you might have to, in some ways cajole them out of their belligerence, like that's what you have to do. If you do not want to open your phone, you do not have to open your phone. But I think you also have to gauge the situation, and like each situation is unique. In some situations, you're able to insist on your rights and safely insist on your rights and get away with it. In some situations, it's so charged, it's so belligerent that it might not be the safest thing to continue to insist on your rights in that way. But I think each individual person will have to figure out the best thing for them to do in the situation. If what you want is what the law says per the Constitution, Section 37, you have a right to privacy.
Okay, thank you so much. So unfortunately, we can't take any more questions at this time. What we are going to do is that we look at this. You can send us your questions to the rehoboth@gmail.com, and maybe I'll have to talk to Olaluwa to probably I'll just filter those questions and then maybe a few of them are sent to you maybe as an email, and then I can send the feedback to them, especially if I see that it's something you've not talked about. Thank you so much. Really appreciate for giving us your time.